Welcome to episode 50 of Hockey Nights in Vegas. Um, it's a very sad day. As you can see, I lost my dear friend. We all lost our dear friend, Joe Pane, a week ago today on April 4th. Joe passed away doing exactly what he loves to do on his couch watching the VGK. Joe and I were friends for well over 20 years. We dined together too many times to count. We sat next to each other in the press box for my time up there. Um, I don't quite yet have the words to describe how I feel right now, but I'll share one funny story with you. How Joe and I first met. Uh, a long time ago in Vegas, there was a TV show that was casting, and it was all about gamblers trying to find the best gambler in Las Vegas, all over, not just blackjack or poker roulette, the best all in all gambler. And if you know Joe, you know that he was an incredibly proficient and successful gambler. And at the time, I was a pit manager in a casino and felt pretty high about myself. And we ended up sitting next to each other at Caesar's Palace, auditioning for a television show with a bunch of famous poker celebrities and famous gambling people from around the country and stuff like that. And we just sort of became fast friends after that. We ended up literally going to dinner for the first time right after that audition. And we were kind of wondering, do you think either of us are going to ever get on this show? Because well, let's be honest, there was lots of younger and prettier TV type people that were there at the audition. So we spent a good couple hours together talking about gambling and talking about life. And we actually ended up talking about hockey because Joe was a lifelong Rangers guy and became a diehard Vegas Golden Knights fan at the inception of the franchise 6 years ago. And as you well know, if you watched any of the episodes of this podcast, I'm pretty much a lifelong Detroit Red Wings guy. So to make this long story short, neither of the old ugly people made it to the TV show, but a fantastic friendship and a fantastic podcast that we did. And there are a lot of people out there right now that are hurting pretty bad. And I'm one of those, but we have to press on. So as a tribute to Joe and the 50th episode of Hockey Nights in Vegas, I have asked three of Joe and I's dearest friends from the press box to join us. We have Chris Chapman from Fox Sports Las Vegas, Jesse Granger from The Athletic, and Lindsey Brown from Lotus Broadcasting. Basically, this is the crew that sits pretty close to each other in the press box and talks a lot of shit and laughs and makes the press box experience and the thing that we shared with Joe really sort of special for all of us. So enough of me waxing on. Whoever wants to start, if you've got a Joe story or an anecdote, fire away.
I mean, I can go first. When I go to the hockey rink, I always have like little interactions and routines and rituals with a bunch of different people, whether that's with T-Mobile staff down to the elevator person who I walk in with, even standing on the glass with Eddie and Joe and sometimes Chapman for pregame warmups. But Joe is really easy to kind of pick out in terms of his routines when I first started covering the Knights just almost 4 years ago, that he would always have four Coca-Colas and at least two bags of popcorn. And this is before every single game. And I thought, I'm like, four Coca-Colas in one game. I couldn't believe it. And that was actually just like basically the first period ration. Like this guy was an absolute machine. And I loved giving him shit for just all of the little things that made Joe unique. He was one of the only people that asked me about my hockey nicknames when I was coming up. And so he was the only one I allowed to call me Brownie. And so he would kind of rib me and call me Brownie. And he was such a fun guy to watch a hockey game with and to have that little relationship that we have in the press box, because it's weirder interactions because Jesse, you have a whole life that I have no idea about. Chapman, you have a whole life I have no idea about. Riv, you have a whole life that I have no idea about. And so I just try to get little stories out of people. And Joe is one of my favorite people to get stories out of. And it's really jarring and devastating when you lose people that are huge parts of your everyday routine that aren't necessarily like big parts of your lives. But I think that Joe was one of those special people that could be both to a lot of people. And so I really miss him already. And I'm really glad that we're doing this for him to help remember him.
Yeah, the funny thing about Joe is he grew up in the same neighborhood as my mother in Brooklyn. So the first time we talked, we connected right away because I felt like talking to him was almost like talking to a guy from the neighborhood. And he was a guy from the neighborhood. I met him year one and we instantly clicked and talked. And one of the funniest things is I'll never forget. And Eddie, I don't know if you were part of the post-game press conferences at the time, but one night Joe showed up to a game wearing New York Ranger sneakers.
No, I was not aware of that.
After a game, and he's wearing New York Ranger sneakers. And the irony is the former coach of the Golden Knights, Gerard Gallant, is now actually the coach of the New York Rangers. So a little funny twist there. But one of my favorite stories from Joe is, when talking to him, it was like talking to a character out of Casino, right? Like you almost felt like he knew Lefty Rosenthal and he was part of that crew. But one of the funny things was he was telling me a story about the night he was in the Palms. And as Eddie, you mentioned, he was a pretty well-known gambler. And I guess he was 86th from the Palms.
Yep, he was.
For Lord knows what, probably beating them. And Reggie Jackson, Mr. October, former New York Yankee and Oakland Athletic star, comes to the table Joe's playing at and sits down. And in the back of his mind, Joe's thinking, oh, shit, someone's going to come to the table and they're going to tell me I have to leave. And, of course, Reggie Jackson asked for all this money. And Joe says, no sooner does Jackson get the money, but there's a tap on the back of my shoulder, and it's someone from the Palms telling me, sir, you need to come with us. So he liked to tell the story about how the night Reggie Jackson got him kicked out of the Palms because he wasn't supposed to be in there. And of all the people to come sit down next to him, it happened to be probably one of the most well-known baseball players of all time.
Jesse?
That's awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, Joe was he was just such a welcoming guy. And I travel a lot for my job, and I'm on the road constantly. I'm in different cities, and it's usually pretty much just me. On occasion, there'll be a writer I know in a city that will go out for dinner or whatever. But every time I went to New York for the last 3 years, I think, Joe made me feel like I was at home. I mean, he's obviously a New York guy. And this past trip, I got to go to the steakhouse with Eddie and Joe. But my favorite story with Joe in New York was actually from 3 years ago, and it was when the Islanders were still playing at the old Coliseum. And one of the reasons I like the New York trip so much is you can stay in the same hotel for the entire trip, and it's super easy to get to the Jersey Arena. It's easy to get to Madison Square Garden. The only exception is the Coliseum is a pain in the ass to get to. And I made the trek out there, and then the game is ending, and it's late at night. We get out of the arena at like midnight, and Joe is like, all right, I'll drive you back to basically to Times Square where my hotel was. And he's like, not only am I going to drive you back, I'm going to give you like the real New York tour. It was the first time I'd ever been in New York City. And so I'm pumped. And because I'm like, nobody knows New York better than Joe. So this guy's going to take me on a great scenic tour. But the funniest part is I don't remember if he was renting a car or if he had borrowed the car from somebody he knew, but he forgot like where he parked. And we walked around the Coliseum. It was freezing cold. The wind was blowing like 40 miles an hour. We were freezing our asses off. We walked around the Coliseum 4 full laps around the building looking for this car. And the thing is, it wasn't like it was a full parking lot of cars. There was like 10 total cars in the parking lot. We saw the car that was his car 4 different times, and Joe was like, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's the car. And then we finally walked up to it, and it's like, all right, this is the car. Yes, this is the car. But I'll tell you, freezing my ass off was well worth it because the tour back to the hotel was spectacular. He took me over the Brooklyn Bridge, and like the turn around this corner was it was like incredible. All the lights of the city. He took me over the Brooklyn Bridge. It was awesome. As I mentioned, I got to go try the most famous steakhouse in New York with Eddie and Joe just this past time. I feel like I have gotten the full New York City experience thanks to Joe. And that's just how he was with everybody. Just made you feel welcome, made you feel at home. As Lindsay said, we miss him already, and I'm really glad we're doing this.
Yeah, the press box isn't going to be the same. Hockey nights in Vegas will not be the same, but I'm sure that Joe would want this thing that we started together 49 episodes ago to go on. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to happen, but with the blessing of our dear friends at the Las Vegas Advisor, who said that they would love to honor Joe's memory by continuing to post the podcast episodes, we're gonna keep going. And we all miss Joe a lot. And right now there's a blackjack table in heaven getting beat up pretty bad because the pit boss up there doesn't know Joe. So we'll leave him to his blackjack game, and we won't forget him. But we do have to talk about the Golden Knights, and we have to talk hockey in honor of Joe because that's what Joe and I did. So there are 2 games left in the regular season. The Golden Knights are in first place in the Western Conference and in the Pacific Division. Edmonton right on their heels. It looks like it's pretty much down to Nashville and Winnipeg for the final wild card spot. And I guess the biggest question is, can Vegas hold serve for the last 2 games and secure home ice advantage throughout the Western Conference playoffs? So I guess, Jesse, do you like their chances this far into the game?
Yeah, I mean, they've played really well against Seattle historically. So you've got 2 games against a team you've played. Sorry, that was my cat. You've got 2 games against a team that you've played really well against, and this team has won a lot. I mean, Edmonton has had one of the best records in the entire West since the All-Star break. Same with LA, and they haven't been able to make up any ground because the Golden Knights just do not lose games recently. Like we were just talking about it at Morning Skate. There's so many things that I find wrong with this team. Like their forward lineup right now with all the guys out doesn't look all that good. Their goalies aren't all that heralded. They're missing 2 key defensemen, but this team doesn't lose. So despite some of the deficiencies you can find in the roster, this team is finding ways to win games. So yeah, I at this point, I expect them to hold serve and find a way to finish atop a very a more competitive than I expected Pacific Division here at the end.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I think it just has a lot to do, at least their success down the stretch, despite all the adversity that Jesse's mentioning that they're going through, is a testament to what Bruce Cassidy has been able to install here. And I think the desperation that a lot of the team felt of guys that were on this squad last year that missed out on the playoffs, because we've talked about it all year. Eddie, you and I were sitting next to each other for the press conference when he was introduced. This is the guy. But there's a process of trust and release that goes on between players and coaches over the course of any hockey season. And I think this team has been challenged by him from an early point to play a certain way, to not go and retract into their old kind of habits where they get very rush heavy. They start taking too many chances in the neutral zone. They start pulling up early in break-ins into the offensive zone and play to the system. And when you have that type of commitment that's contagious to other people in the locker room, they want to make sure they're doing it by the book, playing the blackjack table by the book, not doing anything crazy on third base or anything, just like Joe would have wanted, except not. And I think it's set them up really well for what playoff hockey mindset and mentality is. And I think that it's going to really help them go deeper in probably a more efficient manner than they have in the past.
Chris?
Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback on what Jesse was saying, it's like you look at the way Edmonton has played since the All-Star break, and like common sense would say that they'd be running away with this division, but the Golden Knights have not relented one bit. Like I don't know the percentages, but the Edmonton has just been phenomenal the last 2 months of the season, and Vegas has basically met them at every step of the way. I think they do hold on. I think they will end up winning the division. Edmonton will end up finishing second. But to kind of allude to what Lindsay was saying too, like Bruce Cassidy, like he's not going to win the Jack Adams Award. I mean, it's probably very deservedly going to go to Jim Montgomery in Boston, who have had a phenomenal season. But if you take Patrice Bergeron away from the Boston Bruins, or you take Brad Marchand or David Pastrnak away from the Boston Bruins for the amount of time Mark Stone has been away from the Golden Knights, I don't think they're in the position that they're in. I mean, Mark Stone being gone for basically half the season and the Golden Knights to still be in the position they're in to win the division. I mean, that speaks to the job that Bruce Cassidy's done. And that hasn't even touched on the fact that they've played 5 goalies. I mean, Yuri Patera was in Savannah a year ago, and he's winning. I think I got that right. And he's won 2 games in the NHL. I mean, it's incredible to think of the fact that this team has gone through the adversity that they've had to go through, losing their captain and probably best player. I mean, Shea Theodore, he's been injured, but he missed a bunch of time. And I don't think it's any coincidence that the team started to excel on that New York road trip when you guys are talking about a little bit at that Islanders game. And that was because they got Theodore, they got a healthy blue line. All 6 guys are back in the lineup at that point. And then after the All-Star break, things really took off for this team. But to do it without Mark Stone for the amount of time that he's been gone, to have Shea Theodore gone for basically a third of the season and still be in the position. Pietrangelo missed, 9-10 games due to an illness in his family. I mean, this team has come together unlike I think any of us could have anticipated. And it's just phenomenal to see the job that they've done. And, the locker room is really tight-knit, and there's a lot of guys who go out and play every night for each other. And there's a lot of unheralded guys like Brett Howden and Keegan Colasar who have contributed. And, I think we all want to see Will Carrier back because we all love Will. And he's had a career season and he's missed almost a quarter of it.
Well, I think the Golden Knights have the league exactly where they want them. If you'll take a trip back to year 1 with me, the NHL Network gave the Golden Knights absolutely no respect. They're going to lose. The myth, this is a facade. There's no way that this can go on. Well, the NHL Network, again, is not giving any airtime whatsoever to the Golden Knights. The Edmonton Oilers have 300-point scorers, and that's all fine, well, and good. But if you go into the stats, and you all know I'm not much of a stat guy, I believe that the goal differential between the Golden Knights and the Edmonton Oilers is about 24. So if you run that out over 80 games, there's really not much there. And as much as Edmonton has sort of had their number this year, we all know that playoff hockey is different. And, I don't know if there's a bumper sticker that says I believe in Bruce, but I've been a believer since minute 1. And I think that, just to pop out for next season and get ahead of ourselves, they're going to be better next year than they were this year. If you just look at their record versus the East, where Bruce Cassidy coached for a bunch of years, they had a dominant record against the East. Well, now Bruce has a year of experience coaching against the West, and I expect that the Golden Knights will be an even more dominant team than they are this year. I agree with everybody. I suspect that they're going to hold serve, and they're going to have the home ice advantage throughout the Western Conference playoff scenario. And listen, they've earned it for all the reasons that all of you have said. They keep putting together patchwork lineups, and everybody says, who are these kids from Henderson? And it doesn't matter who they plug in. It doesn't matter what lines or, what Chef Cassidy, how he wants to mix the pot. And to his credit, he kept trying over and over and over again to find line combinations, with the best example being Phil Kessel. He had a very pedestrian first 50, 55 games as a Golden Knight. but in the last 10 or 15 games, he certainly looks reinvigorated, and he looks very engaged on all 200 feet of the ice. So I'm excited certainly for tonight's game, and then Thursday in Seattle, and then to get down to the business of the Stanley Cup playoffs. We touched a little bit on injuries and lineups. The Golden Knights succeeded yesterday in pissing off the entire NHL by showing Mark Stone skating in a non-contact jersey. And we have reestablished ourselves as the bad boys of the league and salary cap skirters and scourging, thieving, cheating bastards. And that's okay, because they did exactly what every other team in the world would do if they had $8.5 million worth of cap space and their captain got back surgery. But with the assumption that he's probably not going to be ready to go in a week, what do we think the lineup is going to look like out from the goalie? The goalies are going to be a whole next separate topic. But what do you think the playoff lineup looks like for the Golden Knight on defense and up front? Lindsay, you want to lead?
Yeah, I can lead. If you're asking like what I would do, I would keep just given what we have for injuries and stuff, that Alec Martinez, Alex Pietrangelo pairing, and if you need to break that up and help supplement, that's fine. But the omission of Zach Whitecloud hurts pretty bad, and I know that I think Bruce said that they're hoping it's not that big of a deal and that they're just kind of holding him out for now. But he's the big glue guy that I think everything kind of centers around, especially with Nick Hag, who I think sometimes can struggle. But the Golden Knights also don't utilize him as offensively advantageous as I would like it. In terms of the top line, you want to get Eichel back, obviously, and keep him with the same guys that he's been skating with. And I would do the same thing with Pavel Dorofeev and what he's been able to accomplish with William Karlsson and Riley Smith. The conjuring of some chemistry there is definitely palpable, and I think that he's earned that just given all that he's been able to put in the net as of late. And then Barbashev, I mean, if Stone is back, do you guys feel comfortable keeping him on the third line and just letting that ride out? Have you guys seen enough from them in the last couple of games to be like, yeah, this is definitely the way that we would go?
I like Barbashev. I'll be the first guy to admit I didn't know a whole lot about him because obviously we only get to see the Blues a few times a year, but he's exceeded my expectations. Like, he's a lot better than I anticipated. And what I like about him is he's a bit of a bastard, and I kind of like that. Like, he plays angry, he plays mean, and I like players like that. I liked Eric Holla because he had a bit of that mean in him, and I feel like Barbashev has a little bit of that too. And I like that, especially at playoff time.
Yeah, I agree. I like Barbashev. If Stone comes back, Barbashev is clearly on the third line because there's no way Stone's not playing with Eichel. Early in the year when Stone and Eichel were on the same line, I think that was one of the three best lines in hockey. So like that's an automatic. If Stone's not back, which is probably more likely here in the first round, I would say I actually think I like Barbashev on the top line more than like Dorofeev's playing there tonight. I like Barbashev up there more because that line's going to have to play against top guys. And as much as I like Pavel Dorofeev, and I think he's brought exactly what this team needs, and I think he should be given offensive chances, I don't think he's ready to play against top lines in the Stanley Cup playoffs. So I'm much more comfortable with Dorofeev there. To me, the lineup question that interests me the most, that I think makes the biggest difference is, so Cassidy has been obsessed with getting Nick Waugh elevated in the lineup and on the wing. He's been trying to play him with Karlsson and Smith. He's tried him up there with Waugh. I mean, with Eichel. He's tried so many different things, and I just don't like it. I think Waugh is so much better as a center. And the other thing is when you move Waugh up and you replace him with Teddy Bluger, who has been fine, that fourth line becomes, they're good at defending, right? Teddy Bluger is a good defensive player. But the problem is if you're defending the entire time, no matter how good you defend, your metrics are going to be bad. And if you look at Teddy Bluger's metric, like if you ask Bruce Cassidy, how's Teddy Bluger done since you came here? Actually, someone asked him this morning. He said nothing but positive things. I love Teddy's game. He wins faceoffs. He's always in the right position. He's learned our system. But if you look at his metrics, his on-ice metrics, how many goals have been scored against and for, they are awful. And the reason is because no matter how well you defend, if you spend the whole time defending, you're going to give up goals. It's hockey. Pucks are going to bounce off guys and in. So to me, that fourth line with Waugh on the fourth line, they spend the majority of the time in the offensive zone. Obviously, William Carrier is a big part of that, and they don't have him. But Waugh and Carrier are so good at holding on to pucks in the offensive zone that their metrics are great because they just spend the whole shift in the offensive zone. The other team can't get it away from them. And by the time they finally do wrestle the puck away, they're exhausted and they've got to go for a change. So to me, it's a drastic difference in philosophy on the fourth line between Waugh and Bluger. And I think this team is much better off having Waugh. I think Waugh is better as a center, and I think the fourth line, to me, the benefit of that you're getting from Waugh up in the lineup doesn't outweigh having that strong fourth line that owns the possession when they're on the ice. So of all the lineup questions, to me, I want to see Nick Waugh centering the fourth line and giving them that matchup advantage.
I am astounded at how Skorofeyev, as they've come to call him, has jumped right in. And, listen, God knows the Golden Knights need people who want to shoot the fucking puck. I mean, I love the pretty Harlem Globetrotters passing, but I mean, if you go back a few episodes, one of the episodes was called "Shoot the Fucking Puck" because I just want to pull my hair out. And this young man, if he sees something, he's shooting it, and I think that's great. But like Jesse said, he's not ready for McKinnon, and he's not ready for Draisaitl and McDavid defensively. I mean, he can skate and he can score, and he's a nice player, and hopefully he'll have a great future with the Golden Knights. But he needs to be on the third line, and I like Barbashev on the first line because, like Chris said, he's got some grit and some bastard in his game. He's the guy that can get the pucks back, that can set up Eichel and Marchessault. And even though Eichel would prefer, it seems, to pass, we all know he can finish. So I think Barbashev should be on the first line for the playoffs. I think Dorofeyev should get a shot on the third line for sure. He's absolutely earned it. Zach Whitecloud is a huge concern. He for a third pairing defenseman, he really is the glue that makes the whole unit sort of stick together. And I don't mean to downplay Shea Theodore in any way, shape, or form, because his offense is absolutely vital. But Whitecloud, there's just something about his game. He's just steady. He's very measured.
He's a stay-at-home defenseman this team needs, that nobody else has that mindset to the degree that he does. Because Petro, he wanders a lot less than he used to.
Yes.
Martinez enables him to do that, but he'll kind of he'll take a few risks here and there. He's more of a front net warrior. But Whitecloud, I feel like, is the calmest guy that you're like, yeah, we're going to be able to get through this zone. It might not be on the first breakout pass, but you trust him to not make that big mistake. And I think it's easy to buy into that as a collective group, because as a goalie, it's great to have defensemen that go down and score, right, Jesse? But I like the ones that make my job easier, and sometimes they're the unsung heroes, and that's the best type of heroes you can be.
So do we think that at the beginning of the playoffs, barring no more injuries, that Paul Cotter and Teddy Bluger are the odd men out?
I would say probably, very likely. I mean, I don't see a spot for Cotter and Bluger. I mean, I like Waugh on the fourth line centering it for exactly what the reasons Jesse laid out. I mean, it gives you a lot more upside offensively, and it's not a knock on Bluger. I mean, his game is what it is, but I think for what this team wants and needs from their fourth line, I just think Nick Waugh fits that perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. I think those guys are the odd men out. The one thing I'll say on Theodore, sorry to jump back on the kind of the Whitecloud and Theodore thing, I think they're missing, I think they're going to miss what Theodore brings more in the playoffs if he can't play, because this team can't score with sustained offensive zone time. They have shown us for years that when the playoffs get here and you can't score in transition, they have a hard time putting the puck in the net. And they score with regularity in the regular season every year. They have to be able to create transition offense, and nobody on this team creates more transition offense than Shea Theodore. So I think that yes, White Cloud's a major piece. I think they've been able to get by without Theodore he's missed a ton of games this year. They've been able to get by without him. I think in the playoffs, when transition opportunities aren't given to you very often and you have to create them, teams aren't turning the puck over. They're playing safer through the neutral zone. They're chipping pucks deep. Sometimes you've got to just manufacture transition with a spectacular play, and that's Shea Theodore's game. So I think we don't know his status. He hasn't skated with the team. It's been a while. I think he's missed 6 games. I think that they're going to miss Shea Theodore a lot more in the playoffs than they have in the regular season if he can't go.
Well, when I was a kid, I loved to ride the merry-go-round. That's absolutely a bullshit lie. But merry-go-round is the key to the next segment. Let's talk about goaltending. Logan Thompson is skating. Aiden Hill is skating. Laurent Brossoit seems healthy. Jonathan Quick is here. And I'm not sure where Yuri Patera is, but hey, okay. I like Yuri Patera too. He's 2-0, and he's got a nice goals against average and a save percentage. But what the hell do you think is going to happen with the Vegas Golden Knights goaltending merry-go-round going into the playoffs? And do you think that maybe, and this is going to probably get smashed by our 2 goaltenders on the panel, do you think maybe it's okay to let Logan Thompson get a whole bunch more rest as opposed to maybe having the 3rd leg, lower body injury? Do you think that maybe they could get by with Aiden Hill, LB, and Jonathan Quick? So go ahead, which of my 2 goalies wants to jump on the VGK goalie merry-go-round?
Jesse, go ahead. I'll let you go first.
So, yeah, I think it's okay to let Thompson get fully healed. My hot take that I think I've been saying in the press box up for a while is Laurent Brossoit is the best goalie on the team when they're all fully healthy. I think Brossoit is the best goalie on this team. He's been better than Thompson this year. It's a small sample size. Thompson was great early in the year. His play tapered off a little bit there towards the end. And considering how long he's been out and the lack of game experience, the lack of game action recently, I think Brossoit is the starter until he proves otherwise. Regardless of Hill and Thompson coming back, I think Brossoit is going to be given the net, and until he loses the net, he's the starting goalie in the playoffs, would be my guess. I don't think Quick is really in the mix. I think they're probably waiting for Hill to show that he can be ready to go. It's going to be interesting to see what they do on Thursday because we know Brossoit is playing tonight. I asked Cassidy this morning, point blank, how important is getting a regular season game in the availability for these goalies in the playoffs? Basically, will you play one of these guys in the playoffs if they don't get a regular season game in? And he said, I'm not going to lie, it is important. They need one. We only have one more. We're not sure what we're going to do. So I think that game up in Seattle Thursday could tell us what they're thinking, both in terms of where Hill and Thompson are, if one of them's closer than the other to being healthy. I think whoever plays that game is probably going to give you a good idea. And then I think that whoever plays that game on Thursday, whether it's Hill or Thompson, they still could technically start Brossoit, but I think we might see one of the guys coming back. I think whoever plays that game is probably more than likely the backup behind Brossoit, and if Brossoit were to falter in the playoffs, I think that guy is probably the most likely to get the second crack at it.
Yeah, I agree with Jesse. In terms of philosophy and goaltenders that match up the best with what Bruce Cassidy does, Brossoit is first place, then Aiden Hill, then Logan Thompson, then Jonathan Quick, just based off of how they play their angles, how they approach situations, and just how they manage their crease. Aiden Hill and Laurent Brossoit both like to sit a little bit deeper in their crease, and that's where sometimes shots from the point can kind of get through because you give up a little bit more of an angle, but it also allows you to compartmentalize the ice a lot better. So if you give up a rebound, you're only worrying about half of it rather than, well, it could be here, it could be there, it could be there, because we had to make some athletic, acrobatic save out of nowhere because we weren't in the best position anyways. And so I don't rush Thompson back. I think they rushed him back last time. More likely, I think Thompson rushed himself back. And I think this is a guy who's ultra competitive, that understands that opportunities in this league are fleeting and few between, especially from where he's come from. And oh yeah, the elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about this year is that Robin Leonard's coming back next season. I think he wants to push himself, and I think the team needs to protect him and in terms themselves as well by not rushing him and giving him that responsibility right now, because you have somebody who's played well all season, Laurent Brossoit, even when he was down in Henderson. And then you hope that Aiden Hill is able to kind of get back and calm down a little bit. What I worry about with him is him getting out of the net and not reading those as well, especially in playoffs when dump-ins are going to be so important and forecheck and everything else. But I think they've managed it incredibly well, and this goalie position's been nothing but a topsy-turvy nightmare since they've traded Flower away. And so I think this season it just worked out so well that everybody seems to be rowing in the same direction, where it's kind of like, well, I think we could go with anybody, but this is the best product we've seen so far, and that's Laurent Brossoit.
Chris?
It's funny. I was on a show a few weeks ago and I made the comment that I think I should probably retract it, that I didn't think it mattered who the Golden Knights played in net, because the team in front of those guys tended to play pretty well all season. Like, there's really not a game where I'm looking at and saying, oh, the goalie lost that game for this team. I mean, there were instances where Bruce Cassidy made the comment, well, maybe our goalie should have made one or two more saves than theirs did. And he's probably right. But as far as looking at 80 games, trying to pick out one game where the goalie was really to blame, I can't think of one. But I do agree with Jesse and Lindsay that Laurent Brossoit has been, again, small sample size, but he's been the best of the bunch. Like, I don't know. Like, the funny thing is that we're talking about 4 goalies, and it's really possible that 3 of them are not on the team next season. I mean, I don't know how many teams enter a playoff situation where they've got this type of these amount of cookies in the cupboard, and 3 of them could be gone next season. Like, it's just a really weird dynamic and scenario. But I think you got to go with with Laurent Brossoit, and I agree. I think Aiden Hill has probably played himself into the number 2 role. I mean, we'll see what happens on Thursday night. But I mean, I remember Aiden Hill, his last performance, he was phenomenal, and then he got hurt, and we didn't even know he was hurt. So the good thing, I guess maybe the one knock on Brossoit is something that the Golden Knights really won't have to worry about, and that's a shootout, because obviously there are no shootouts in the playoffs. So I think that's kind of the one knock you can have on his game, although I think he won his last shootout, if I'm not mistaken. But nonetheless, I think he's the guy, and I think he's the guy until he proves he's not the guy.
Here's a great stat for your point about it doesn't matter who's the goalie. If you look at goals saved above expected, which I'm not a huge goalie stat guy, but that's probably the best stat to quantify goalies. Yeah. The Golden Knights don't have a goalie in the top 36 in the entire no goalie in the top 36. But if you look at save percentage, they have the 7th best save percentage in the NHL, which tells you this defense is making life incredibly easy on these goalies. They've gotten mediocre goaltending that has resulted in above average results because Cassidy's defense and these defensemen and the forwards back checking. This team makes life easy on its goal.
Well, I think I'll put my Bruce Cassidy hat on. I think that Bruce Cassidy would be the most comfortable with Laurent Brossoit in net. Stylistically, he's the calmest of the 4 goalies. And then you have Aiden Hill. So I think if he had his druthers, he would want the how am I going to say this? The least adventurous in the crease for his goaltending tandem. Whereas if you look at Logan Thompson and you look at Jonathan Quick, even at 36 or 37, you see flashbacks of Flower flying all over the crease and some goals going behind him because he's 4 feet out of the crease because he overplayed something. And while aggression is good, I suspect that Sean Burke, while teaching the mantra of Bruce Cassidy, is let's stay in the blue paint, let's be calm, let's make the key saves, and let's minimize the rebounds. And I think if you look at those 4 simple, newbie sort of requests of your goalie, I think it's pretty clear that it's LB and Aiden Hill are probably 1-2.
I will say, I think Logan Thompson, I think Cassidy will, like, if everyone's healthy, I think Thompson gets a little credit for being the guy. Cassidy is a veteran coach that he always leans on his veterans. I mean, look, Paul Cotter can have 10 good games. He has one bad one, you're out of the lineup. Phil Kessel can have
shot blast right into the press box.
Phil Kessel can have 2 months of terrible games, and he still gets to play it out because he's a veteran and the coach trusts him. He'll find his game. That's just how Cassidy kind of handles his veterans. And while Thompson isn't a veteran, I think the fact that he was the number one goalie for most of the year holds some weight to Bruce Cassidy. I will say that. So, like, me personally, I agree that Hill maybe is a better stylistic fit than Thompson, but I think Thompson would have the edge over Hill just based on he was the guy. Let's let him, like, if Brossoit can't get it done, let's let him have his turn type of thing.
Okay. At the beginning of the season, Joe and I we did some predictions, and you know, I'm not going to speak ill of Joe, but his prediction sucked and he was completely wrong.
Okay. I think they struggled to make the playoffs this year, only because I'm not certain about the goaltending. And the Golden Knights may make the playoffs. I think they made the playoffs, but I think they make it as a wild card. I mean, I like your positivity, but I think it's going to be a struggle. It's going to be a struggle to get into third place. That's my opinion. They'll be fighting all year.
So Joe up there, we're having a chuckle at your lack of predictions. And I'll take a moment to pat myself on the back where I said that they will win the division and they'll be a 100-point plus team. But since we didn't have the three of you, I'm sure at the beginning of the season that you had expectations and possibly a prediction for this season's Vegas Golden Knights. So my question to the three of you is, did the 2022-2023 Vegas Golden Knights meet or exceed your predictions for this year? Regular season only, because we'll talk about the playoffs in a bit.
Yeah, they definitely exceeded mine. I'm not ashamed to admit I didn't think they would be in this position. I had some big time questions about the goaltending. I had some questions about the change in systems and how well this team would adapt to that change in system. I obviously had questions about the power play because we saw how much it struggled last year. There were health concerns, and some came to fruition, some didn't. But, you know, clearly this team overachieved, in my opinion. I figured Edmonton and Calgary were going to be the two best teams in the division, and I thought the Golden Knights would be fighting LA for third to try to get into the playoffs, or at least, you know, not be a wild card team. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was wrong. I was definitely wrong about Calgary. I mean, they're not even going to make the playoffs. So, you know, it's a strange dynamic, though, because Bruce Cassidy, he got this team to click right out of the gate. And I said, how is this team winning games? And then you watch, and they hit a little bit of a lull. But since the All-Star break, they've been one of the two or three best teams in the league. So they definitely exceeded my expectations, like I said. I mean, and then when you factor in the reality that they didn't have Mark Stone, I don't know how they couldn't have exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, my predictions are in ink. I do my bold predictions before every season. I had them third behind Edmonton and Calgary. So like Chris, whiff on Calgary. They were awful. I expected them to be much better. I did take them over 96.5 points, which was their at the odds makers. That was their point total. So I took them over that. I probably expected them to be closer to 100 than 107, 110, which is what they're approaching. So I'll say they exceeded that a little bit. It was more so Calgary being awful than the Golden Knights being better than I expected, I guess. But like Chris said, if you would have told me Mark Stone's going to play as little as he has, I probably would have picked them even lower. So the fact that they've been able to overcome that is big. I thought the reason I had them third in the division, I thought the goaltending would be a bigger problem than it's been. They have survived with some goalies that have never been starters in the NHL. I thought it would be a bigger problem. It hasn't been a problem. As you said earlier, their losses have very rarely been on the goaltending. So yeah, they have exceeded my expectations.
They exceeded mine as well. I definitely did not have them winning a division. I was a little bit more ahead on Calgary just because they had so much of their offense leave. And granted, they did a great job in trying to replace that, but it takes a little while for things to click in. And ultimately, when you're not playing Jonathan Huberdeau in the right position on the ice, things aren't going to go super well for you, especially with all the bad luck that team had that season. But in terms of what I needed to see from them, other than other than the snarl of just being left out in the cold last year, the diversification of their offense, I think, has been really great to see bloom. And otherwise, because as Jesse talked about, this team has been so heavily reliant on transition offense, and then has a really strong tendency to base a lot of their play in the high zone, or at least they did last year because they had so many injuries. So they just said, Alex Pietrangelo, please save our souls. And so they had to kind of work that out of their system and work the puck down into the lower parts of the ice and those cycles. And we've seen that. And I know that there's been, periods of time where the power play still hasn't been up to snuff, but it's been better. And I just think that this team is in a lot better of a spot mentally if they do run into a hot goalie down the stretch in the playoffs, as they've done in previous seasons, because they have, I think the stat was 5 or 6 guys with at least 50 points. Like, just to have that confidence around the world that if it's not me, it can be somebody else, I think is going to bode very well for them. But they've earned that. And I mean, Calgary's a surprise, but so are Seattle. Like, Seattle, nobody expected Seattle to be here either. And they've been able to dispatch some big time opponents as well. And just in terms of how the season shifted too, I think everybody was expecting the Eastern Conference to run away with it. Like, I picked the Bruins to miss the playoffs preseason. So if we're all going to air out our dirty laundry, I'll put that out there. But with how Vegas has played, with how LA has played, with how Edmonton has played, you could say, just based off of how things have gone, even Nashville, that the West is kind of the stronger bit right now, especially with the losses that Carolina's had to sustain, and some other teams like the goalie situation in Toronto. Like, there are a lot more unanswered questions in the Eastern Conference than there is in the West for me.
Well, it's funny. I think if somebody privately polled our 3 guests on the podcast and had a phone line up to Joe in heaven and said, "Hey, do you think Eddie's an optimist?" Yeah, no one's going to say Eddie's an optimist because Eddie's not an optimist. But Eddie, from the second that, like Lindsay spoke about before, from the very first press conference, the second, third, fourth word out of his mouth was accountability. And I've been on the "in Butch I trust" train full on since the beginning. And I did pick them to win the division. And the fact that they made me look like a smart prognosticator, having overcome the significant injuries, the Mark Stones, the Shea Theodores, the Pietrangelos, even the Zach Whitecloud, who we didn't really talk about as much in the injury front, but he missed a whole chunk of games right around that All-Star break. And that last game on the island when we were there, and the 6 of them were in the lineup for the first time in a very, very long time. That's the Golden Knights team that we've basically had since the All-Star break. All right. Cup in 6. As we transition, as our friend Ken calls Mr. Foley, the creator, he's been on the Cup in 6 train for since the get-go. He's modified it a few times after the first year and everything like that. And I'm sure that he's learned a lot of painful lessons about hockey in the 6 years. But the one thing that he has not backed down from is Cup in 6. Well, here we are, kids. It's year 6. And the last topic we have for this episode is a prediction. I'm not worried about the regular season. The Golden Knights are in the playoffs. So, ladies first, Miss Brown, how far are the Golden Knights going to go in the Stanley Cup playoffs this year?
I think they make the conference finals. And then after that, I don't know. I look at it as the GM. You get the team to the conference finals, and it's all up to them from there, of whose fault it is and whose fault it isn't. But I think you have some teams that could knock each other out in the Central Division. They haven't played well against Edmonton this year, but I just think playoff hockey is different. I think there's a shepherding of a new era in the NHL, because we didn't expect, Edmonton to make the deep run they did last year, but we didn't expect the amount of goals to be scored that were last year. And so I'm very interested to see the overall playoff picture and how, if that will keep up, or if we'll see a regression back to the mean of more hard-nosed, lower scoring hockey. But I think the Golden Knights have a real shot of making at least the conference finals.
Jesse or Chris, whoever.
Go ahead, Chris.
I I hate to be the guy to rain on the parade, but I don't see this team getting past the Edmonton Oilers. Whether that be in the second round, which it seems like that would be when they would play them. I just think Edmonton is playing at a much different level this year than we've seen in the past. Connor McDavid is on an absolute mission. They've got multiple ways that they could beat you. The one question mark, of course, is their goalie situation. But the problem is you can't keep that team you can't keep them off the power play. And when they're on the power play, they're just so damn good. I mean, the best team I've seen in my lifetime, probably all of our lifetimes that we've seen on the power play. I think they'll get by whoever they play in the first round, whether it's Winnipeg, Seattle, Nashville, or LA. I think they'll beat whoever it is. I just don't see them beating the Edmonton Oilers. I think Edmonton is going to I think they're going to go to the final. I think they're going to win the Western Conference. After that, I have no idea. But I mean, I would be extremely surprised and extremely impressed if they beat the Edmonton Oilers. So I think second round is probably as far as this team's going to go.
Jesse?
I'm right there with you. I think the two best teams in the Western Conference are Colorado and Edmonton. And I think that there are some really good teams, but there's a gap between. I think those two are the clear cream of the crop in the West. I think that if this team had a Marc-Andre Fleury or a Robin Lehner in net, I'd be more likely to say their depth can overcome the elite scoring that an Edmonton or a Colorado has. But as much as I just said the goaltending proved me wrong, I'm just going to keep on predicting that the goaltending is going to be the eventual Achilles heel. So they've already made me wrong on this. I'm just going to keep on down this trail of I don't think the goaltending is good enough, and I'll die on this hill. And if Brossoit proves me wrong and Brossoit leads this team to the Stanley Cup final, I'll be the first one to say, "Holy shit, this guy did it." Until then, I just don't think they've got the goaltending. I think in the playoffs, goaltending is more important, unless you've got a Connor McDavid and a Leon Draisaitl that can just outscore your goalie problems. And I don't think this team can outscore its goalie problems. So I think whenever they run into Edmonton or Colorado, that's probably where the end of the line is. So I'm right there with Chris. Second round. If they were to beat Edmonton, I'd be incredibly impressed.
Well, Eddie the Optimist is going to go way out on a limb and die on a hill further up the road. I understand everything about Edmonton. I just don't think that they are as disciplined a team, as well coached a team as the Golden Knights. I think that Edmonton might very well struggle with Los Angeles in the 2-3 matchup because Los Angeles plays that horribly boring 1-3-1 neutral zone smush. So I'm going to say that this year we get what everybody wanted to see last year, and that is a Vegas Golden Knight, Colorado Avalanche Western Conference final with the Golden Knights having home ice advantage. And I'll end my prediction there.
Smart.
They played Colorado pretty well this year.
They have.
And they've played Colorado pretty well. Colorado is likely going to be without Cale Makar, which is massive.
Yeah.
And Cale Makar is Shea Theodore and Zach Whitecloud. And,
and like 6 other players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Alex Pietrangelo.
And Magic.
Right. And the captain hasn't played yet. So they're struggling quite a bit with injuries. They're playing fantastic right now. They certainly are peaking at the right time. Last year was the year everybody said this is going to be the big gun showdown in the Western Conference final. So I'll go ahead and predict that for this year. And man, oh man, could you imagine what a Game 7 between the Avs and the Golden Knights in the Fortress might be like?
Be incredible.
Holy shitballs, folks.
Yeah.
That would be some entertaining hockey for all of us to enjoy if the NHL gives us credentials.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With good vantage points.
Oh no, we're gonna be in Hyde. You don't have to worry about
Oh,
that.
we'll miss half the ice. Hey, we're just happy to be in the building, Golden
That's
Knights.
it.
If you're
Hanging out
happening
with
to
my
listen
buddy
to this.
Tommy and Hyde.
That's
Yeah.
it.
Granger, you're fine. I mean, us three, we're
Me,
gonna have
me,
to
me,
probably
Lindsay,
beg
and
for our
Eddie will be
supper.
drinking
Yeah.
some 7.5
We're-
brewery during the
I'll
second
get to be
period.
on press row for the first period. Chapman will be for the second, and Eddie can come out for the third.
That's all we're
As long
gonna
as you
get.
can get your hot dog
Yeah,
or
facts. And my
your
ketchup,
ketchup
more
with a side of
importantly.
hot dog.
Yeah.
That
Joe
stinks up the
had
beer.
hot dogs for his last meal at the Fortress, and so I think that's more of a sign of solidarity from him without us knowing it at the time.
So that's going to wrap up episode 50. A very melancholy adventure this turned out to be in honoring our friend Joe Pane, who we lost at the age of 72 last week. Joe, I hope that we did you a solid. I hope that you appreciate and that you love that I was able to put together 3 of our friends from the press box and talk a little smack about you, but honor the great guy that you are, the great character that you are, but the even greater guy that you are. And I know that all of our friendships are enhanced by the time that we got to spend with you. And before I say goodbye, I want to thank Chris and Jesse and Lindsay for taking an hour of their day to share some memories about Joe and to have a few laughs and to try to deaden the blow and the pain and the numbness that that we're all kind of feeling. So we'll wrap it up. We'll thank the Las Vegas Advisor at www.lasvegasadvisor.net, who have graciously posted all of the past episodes of Hockey Nights in Vegas and have agreed to continue in Joe's honor for whatever it is I decide to do and how I want to take Hockey Nights in Vegas going forward. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. I know it's time for pregame routines, and I'll see the 3 of you later tonight at the Fortress. Viewers, thank you so much for your patronage. Leave a comment, leave a happy story in the comments about Joe or myself, and we really appreciate you spending your time with Joe and I, and this episode with Chris and Jesse and Lindsay and myself. So thank you very, very much, Joe. We miss you, and we'll never forget you. And we'll see everybody for episode 51 coming up playoff time. Thanks again.